Hello, BookTube. Joseph Reads Books made a video today about 40 books that he needs to read before he's 40. I'll leave a link to it down below if I'm a good boy and remember. And it reminded me what we should all remember, which is that the sands of time are going pit-pat in the glass. In only 12 years, I myself will be 40. So I thought I would assemble a list as well of 40 books I need to read before then. Starting with this one. This is by Billy Zamy, with an assist by Mike Thomas, and it's called Carson the Magnificent. It's a biography of talk show host Johnny Carson. And, well, I'm up for it, absolutely. I want to know what this author will do with it. The title gives me pause, because if you're starting a book about someone with such a well-known reputation for for having feet of clay, and you're calling it Carson the Magnificent, I don't know. It fills me with doubt, but we will see. Then we have Mark Greaney, well-known item here. An author who has enormous credit in the Bank of Steve. This is his latest Gray Man novel, The Chaos Agent. The Gray Man series was given a somewhat lackluster cable adaptation onto video. That I imagine gave it a much bigger audience, but the core audience of loyalists for these books, I think, is locked in because they're so good. They're just so good. Then we have one of those big Michael K. Vaughan style $120 hardcover omnibuses from Marvel Comics. I'm not usually very tempted by them, but two things. Number one, when these things disappear, when they're not new anymore, they're, for a brief window of time, they go to half price on the secondhand markets like Amazon or eBay. And then when they disappear from there, they come back with collectible prices, hugely $300 prices. So that tempts me. And also, Marvel has been weirdly diffident about breaking these hardcovers up into paperbacks down the line and printing them. They've been weirdly diffident about that. I can't help but think that it's because they don't want those paperbacks to interfere with their ongoing Epic collection line, and sometimes these don't line up. I don't know off the top of my head if the issues in this omnibus have actually been in Epic collections or not. Michael K. Vaughan would know, but I might be tempted to the hardcover. It doesn't have a title, these things never do. It's just a Fantastic Four omnibus. Which actually, now that I think about it, is going to dovetail rather well with Michael K. Vaughan's reading plans for 2025. He plans on reading the Fantastic Four all the way to the end. This was a frenetic, weird period in the Fantastic Four's history. One of my favorite periods. I was reading these as they were coming out for 25 cents, 20 cents on the newsstands, and really enjoying them. For a large chunk of these issues, the art is done by Rich Buckler, and he's doing a kind of Jack Kirby homage. This cover, if you look at it just square on, you would assume that it is Jack Kirby, but it's not. It's Rich Buckler doing Jack Kirby. But there are other artists here, and there's some fantastic storylines here. And briefly, we have a new member of the team, the royal family of the Inhumans, a segregated supernatural race that isn't the Eternals. The race of the Inhumans, the royal family of the Inhumans, once upon a time in the 1960s, one of their junior members, a girl named Crystal, briefly became a member of the Fantastic Four. And in this period for the Fantastic Four, it's Medusa. It's the queen consort of the Inhumans, who also becomes a member of the team. And it leads to really good issues. So I guess maybe this counts as a reread before I'm 40. I don't know if this omnibus will have any new editorial material. A lot of times they don't. You'd think that if they're charging $130, they'd get Roy Thomas to write an introduction, but a lot of times they don't, so we will see. The same thing with this one. I've shown you this one before. This is edited by Dean Hansen, and I have yet to receive it. Not the finished copy anyway, and I don't know what they'll be in the way of text. This is the Fantastic Worlds of Frank Frazetta. There you have John Carter of Mars, facing an animal underneath Mars's moons. There are too many moons on this cover, but that's all right. Will be mostly the appeal of this will be mostly the same as the appeal of any Taschen volume, which will be the art reproduction, but it'll have a lot of text. The Taschen volumes always do. It'll have a lot of text, so that might not count as a read either, or maybe not. I'll be mostly ogling the pictures. Same thing with this next one. which again, I'm not 100% sure counts. This is by Paul and Gaetan Brizzi, and this is Dante's Inferno, a graphic novel adaptation of Dante's Inferno. I don't know anything about this. I have yet to receive even sample pages. I don't know if this is a new translation or whose translation they're using if it's not. I can guess that the art here is influenced by Gustave Doré. That cover certainly looks like it is. And so I'm not 100% sure, again, how much it will qualify for 40 books before I turn 40. Because if it's an earlier translation of the Inferno into English, then I've already read it. But I haven't looked at the artwork, so we'll see. Then this next one is straight up something I just need to read in the next 12 years. And that is Richard Price's new book, Lazarus Man, which comes out next month. I'm an on-again, off-again spotty fan of this author. He is, I think, a reluctant member in good standing of the Dude Bro reading establishment, but he's also brilliantly talented, so we'll see if Lazarus Man does the trick. This next one is by an author that I really, really like, Nigel Hamilton. I've shown you this book before, but I have yet to read the finished copy. This is Lincoln versus Davis. His new book about the leadership contest between the President of the United States and the chief rebel, Jefferson Davis, calling himself the President of the Confederacy. And Hamilton, I think, is going to underscore the fact that the men were very different. Jefferson Davis was extremely experienced in political matters, extremely experienced in rhetorical matters, had a military background. Lincoln, none of that was true for him. I'm hoping that Nigel Hamilton does not make this a narrative about how the inexperienced person who had right on his side, and so he triumphed. The inexperienced person had the foundries of Newark, New Jersey on his side. That's why he triumphed. But we'll see. I don't know if this will be a virtue off. And then we have another author with whom I have a mixed relationship. The mixed relationship I have with Richard Price is sometimes he writes a book that I think is less than brilliant. The mixed relationship that I have with this author is that sometimes I think that every once in a while, lost in one of his morasses of C-rate mediocrity, will be something that has the potential to be brilliant if someone else wrote it, which is not quite the same kind of mixed relationship. The author is Haruki Murakami, and this is his new book, The City and Its Uncertain Walls. So we'll see. We'll see. I don't hold out much hope. Then I guess this next one also doesn't count because I've already read the book a couple of times. But I imagine that much like the graphic novel of Dante's Inferno, this will seem new because of the pictures. This is Neil Gaiman's improbably best-selling book, Norse Mythology. Isn't a novel. It's just him retelling stories from Norse mythology, only this is the illustrated version. There you have it, I presume, the gigantic Fenris wolf there looming out of the blue. The illustrations are by Levi Pinfold, not an illustrator I know by name. I think they run throughout the book. I think they're not only full-page things, but also spot illustrations as well. So I have no idea how that will change the reading experience. But then we have something brand new, something I did not see coming, wasn't expecting it at all. We've talked many times. We just spent a whole month talking about Conan pastiche novels. Where another author comes on board and tells us a story of Robert E. Howard's signature character, Conan the Barbarian. To good or ill effect. In my September, it was mostly ill effect. But this is not quite that. This is a Red Sonja pastiche novel. So a pastiche of a pastiche. We covered that in Sumerian September. Red Sonja is Roy Thomas's pastiche and adaptation of a character briefly mentioned in a totally different historical context in a Robert E. Howard story. Roy Thomas came up with the idea of putting a version of that character, Red Sonja, in the Hyborian Age and making her a great sword-wielding contemporary of Conan the Barbarian, only a woman. It worked really well. Fans loved it. I loved it. And for the first time in probably 40 years, Red Sonja gets a pastiche novel of her own by Gail Simone. Consumed is the name of the thing. I don't know what to expect here. No idea. On any given day of the week, on any given randomly numbered day of the week, Gail Simone can be really good. She wrote an absolutely stellar run on Wonder Woman, the comic book. All the rest of the time, the most reductive Twitter politics, girl boss who don't need no man, ridiculous virtue signaling posturer. So no idea what to expect. No idea what Red Sonja will bring out in her. We shall see. This next one is by Robin Wall Kimmerer. who's the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, which is a book I know a lot of you liked a lot more than I did. And this is the new book, The Serviceberry, which is about, well, the subtitle says abundance and reciprocity, but the idea that I get is that this is about, in large part, I don't want to say philanthropy, because that even has its etymological roots in humans, but a kind of thinking outside yourself, or thinking outside of clan. I think this has a lot of that in it. I'm not as big a fan of Braiding Sweetgrass as a lot of you are, but I recognize that it was a wonderfully done book, so I'm assuming this will be wonderfully done. We'll see. I'm wide open to it. This next one, it's Star Trek fiction, so a little late for a summer of Trek, and it's by an author who's got the gig. This person has the gig for writing Star Trek fiction. That job is hers as long as she wants it. But not many of her efforts have done much for me. This is Star Trek Strange New Worlds, so the current ongoing TV show about Captain Pike on board the Enterprise, that is steadily, very consciously, very quietly rewriting the continuity of the original series. In my opinion, to write out the original series so that there won't ever have been a time when the Enterprise was captained by a womanizer. There won't ever have been a time like that. But I could be wrong about that. I hope that I'm right about it, because if I'm wrong about it, that means that the perpetrators of New Trek might have taken it into their head to do a reboot of the original series, which would be a stake through my heart. No doubt about it. Bad as Lord of the Rings has been, bad as anything would be, that would be a stake through my heart. But this is the new Strange New Worlds book. I have no idea how much of Strange New Worlds TV continuity I'm going to need to know to read this thing. It's called Asylum. I don't know anything about it, so I will read it, of course. It seems a little bit odd not to read Star Trek fiction, but it could leave me just out in the dark. It could leave me cold, because it could be preachy. Strange New Worlds as an iteration of New Trek has been less preachy than almost any other, but you can feel the showrunners just champing at the bit to make sure you know that your grandparents were horrible people. They want you to know that. They want you to feel bad about that and maybe pay them money because of it. But they've been restrained in being explicit about it. Star Trek Discovery was entirely that. That's what the show was. Strange New Worlds has not been that bad on the subject. It hasn't been Star Trek at all. But it's beautifully done, and it's often been very beautifully or very excellently acted, whatever it is. So I don't know how the book will strike me. And then this next one, another big Michael K. Vaughan style $120 omnibus. Don't know about this. I'm tempted. I don't know that these issues will ever be reprinted. This is Superman the Exile and Other Stories. This is by Dan Jurgens and Roger Stern, and the artwork is by Kerry Gamble and also especially Jerry Ordway, the great Jerry Ordway, who does this cover. I have to confess, if I can get a copy of this, if I can get a copy from DC Entertainment, that would be wonderful. If I can buy a copy of this, my main draw would be the artwork of Jerry Ordway, who's one of the greatest Superman artists of all time. Whose artwork I think this story, the stories included in this big volume, I think these are the last time he did regular work of any kind in comics. The comics themselves take place in abomination of a time period in the character's history, as you can tell from the cover. Superman does not need a breathalyzer if he's out in space. Superman is invulnerable and doesn't need to breathe. So he can fly through space at the speed of light or beyond anytime he wants, anywhere he wants, when he wants, straight off the breakfast table. He does not need any kind of equipment to fly in space. And his strength is not limited. And if I remember these stories correctly, he goes from one planet to another where his strength is, oh my God, oh, he hit me really hard. Oh, this is really heavy. No. but I also remember that some of these issues were really good despite that. I trained myself in that era not to think of the character as Superman, and that helped a lot. And then this next one, it's big. I think it's both physically huge and also extremely expensive, but I'm gonna be tempted. This is Superman: The Definitive History, big fat encyclopedia of Superman. I believe the first definitive history, the first book that kind of wants to be a definitive history of Superman in 20 years or more. I am a huge Superman fan. Huge. It would feel wrong for this thing to be out there in the world and for me not to have it. My hesitation only comes from the fact that it's probably going to be a size factor that doesn't interest me at all, and I'm not going to use. I'm going to get it, I'm going to ooh and ah over it, and then it's going to go on a shelf and never get used again because it's too heavy. And also because the last few chapters of Superman the Definitive History are going to consist of, the writing in the last two chapters is going to consist of a blue-haired Twitter activist basically telling me that Superman is, say it with me now, literally worse than Hitler, and that my grandparents were horrible people for liking him back when they did. I don't want to read that anymore. Even the years of me being outraged by that kind of crap when it's perpetrated by DC or especially Marvel Comics, even those years are over. Now it's just boredom. I don't want anything to do with it. I've cut my relationships with the weekly comics for these companies. I don't watch their movies. So I don't have anything invested anymore. Their goal 10 years ago was to drive away fans like me. They succeeded. Unless it's paying for reprints of older material, I give them nothing. If I know I'm going to encounter those chapters, it's going to make it that the ending's going to be an anticlimax. It's going to be very boring. I don't know. I will mull over it and see. I have 12 more years. Then we have Craig Johnson. I've shown you this book before. In fact, I've raved about it before because I have read it. It's only 90 pages long. It's not hard to read, but I want to reread it. When I get a finished copy, I will reread it. It's tooth and claw. And the reason that it's a Walt Longmire story, and the reason it's not called a Walt Longmire novel is because it's so short. It's a little bit longer than a typical novella, but as you can tell from the cover, it's about our redoubtable Walt Longmire, a great hero. This is a great ongoing series. Versus, among other things, a ravenous polar bear. And the ravenous polar bear, especially as the novella gets going, and especially at the end, the ravenous polar bear is a page that Craig Johnson takes from killer animal novels going back of old. Killer animal novels are fun anyway, but they're always that little bit more fun when the killer animal has human or greater level intelligence, when it starts to act for non-animal reasons, when it starts to take things personally. Sharks don't take things personally, Mr. Brody. Of course, when the old Biddy Bean says that in Jaws 2, the whole audience knows, yes, they do. That's the whole point of this movie. Once the polar bear in question becomes a character, I was in love with this book and definitely want to reread it. This next one is by David Hone. I've praised him before on this channel. You should look up his name on YouTube. Any lecture on YouTube of him, you're going to love it. What a teacher he is about dinosaurs, especially his beloved Tyrannosaurus Rex. And he has a new book coming out that I have not yet read. I have a copy. I haven't read it yet. This is Uncovering Dinosaur Behavior, What They Did and How We Know. So this won't be just T-Rex. And the key thing about the cover there that you might blow right by is the how we know. There is nobody better at explaining how we know than David Hone. He's just incredible at it. He's holding the fossil of femur. The fossil of a femur of a predatory dinosaur that was maybe as big as an African rhinoceros, a black rhinoceros. Lived, I don't even know, 110 million years ago. And it was a big predatory dinosaur about the size of a rhinoceros, and he has a fossilized femur bone. You would look at that bone and you would think, what can you tell from this bone about this animal? And you or I would say, well, it was really big. And that's all. We would have to stop soon after that. You would be amazed how long he can keep going with scientifically based deductions from that one bone. It's incredible. So the book's going to be amazing. Then we have Katherine Rundell. This is her new book, Vanishing Treasures. It is a collection of short, from what I gather, it's a collection of short natural history biographies of very endangered animals in the world. So just chapter after chapter after chapter, which is always interesting. We are in the middle of the worst extinction in the planet's history. We're losing more biodiversity every year than It's pretty catastrophic. Elizabeth Kolbert's book, The Sixth Extinction, you might remember that book. That was along the same lines. This will be a lot harder to take. I've read a lot of books like this. There's a big picture book from National Geographic that's about this, about vanishing animals. It'll be tough. It'll pull at the heartstrings, but worth reading. Then we have Cy Montgomery, the great Cy Montgomery, author of The Soul of the Octopus. And this is the new book, What a Chicken Knows. Now, with Cy Montgomery, I have to be a little careful. You don't, but if I'm talking about this from an editorial standpoint or a reviewer standpoint, I have to be a little careful because Cy Montgomery's people, her agent and her publisher, are always repackaging older work. I don't know off the top of my head if this is an older book that is repackaged. Doesn't matter to me. It'll have something new in it. It'll have a new introduction, and it'll also be new to me. I've never read Cy Montgomery on chickens before. I've known a lot of chickens. So this will be fascinating, What the Chicken Knows. And when it comes to this author, you're going to read anything anyway. Then we have a romance novel. This is by Christina Diane. It's The Earl and the Vixen. It looks like a modern Regency romance. I don't know this author. I don't think I know this author. And I'm always up for finding new romance authors that I don't know, especially in my beloved Regency period. So I will gladly give this a try at some point in the next 12 years before I turn 40. Then we have a book by Vaughn Scribner. This sounds fascinating. This is called Under Alien Skies. I think it's from a university press. And it's about the experiences of the forces of the Crown in America in the American Revolution. So the Redcoats, the conscripts, the Hessian mercenaries. It's about their experiences, but it's about their experiences finding themselves in the Pliocene epoch. It's about their experiences finding themselves in a natural world that is hell, absolute hell. And that is an angle I've never thought of before. Then in addition to everything else, these soldiers coming over under Gentleman John Eagle Burgoyne or whoever were from the parade grounds of the German kingdoms. They were from the grassy fields of England. All of a sudden, they're coming to this new world and plunging into its wildernesses. In a lot of cases, these men were plunging into its wildernesses. What do they find there? Unending clouds of bloodthirsty bugs. Midges, mites, horseflies, mosquitoes. Oh my God, mosquitoes. Unending clouds of those. Beyond comprehension. Beyond anything they'd ever experienced. Even in German marshes. But what else? Bears. Lots of them. And you go far enough west in your campaigns in the American Revolution, and all of a sudden the bears that were really bothering you or terrifying you, well, they don't seem to be as prevalent. And why is that? Because they're being scared off by a kind of bear that's 3 times as big. But also, you've got a deer that bounds through a wood or across a pasture. But also, back in the woods and up on the hills, you've got antlered animals that are much bigger, much more dangerous. So that if you don't kill them right away, they'll kill you. Under every log, under every rock, a rattlesnake. Let's number the poisonous snakes on English soil. There are none. And if there were, it would be an oddity, and you would come from miles around to look at it. Whereas in some of the campaigns that especially some of these soldiers went through in the American South, the snakes were everywhere. The rain was everywhere. The trees were everywhere. The forest went on forever. The ravines had a darkness at the bottom that no person, white or red, had ever seen. They were suddenly plunged into a Pliocene nightmare world. In addition to all of their duties, in addition to the hot musket balls that they had to face on the battlefield, they also had to face this weird new world. I think that's fascinating. Can't wait to read it. Can't wait to read it. I love it when a history book gives me a new angle on something like that, on a subject that I know well. All right, well, speaking of which, this next one is by Andrew Norman, and it is going to give me a new angle on something. This is The Dinosaurs and Their Mysterious Demise. And this book rehearses the familiar story of the dinosaurs flourishing, covering every niche everywhere in the world, terrifying the little animals creeping around in the crevices, the little mammals who are our ancestors. and dominating everywhere, the skies, the seas, and the surface of the world, when an asteroid strikes the planet at 3 times the speed of a bullet. Just an asteroid strikes the planet off the Yucatan Peninsula, what is now the Yucatan Peninsula, and causes an impact so strong that the debris, some of it, winds up on Mars. Some of it winds up on the moon. And it plows so much debris into the sky that a lot of that debris is blown up into the sky by an explosion, the severity of which we cannot calculate. There's no reason to talk about how many hundreds of Hiroshima bombs. You can't imagine it. A lot of the debris that was thrown up by that impact got to the upper atmosphere, slowed its trajectory, Earth's gravity starts to assert itself, and it comes back down, turning to fire as it re-enters the atmosphere, so that fire rains down everywhere in the world. And once that was done, there's a thick pall of cloud cover over most or all of the planet for a long, long, long time. We know this because of the iridium boundary, the K2 boundary. There's an ore that is very much present in asteroids and hardly present at all on Earth, and there is a line right at the same geological level all around the world where that stuff was just snowed down and caught in the fossil record and then buried. So we know that something catastrophic like that happened. And people always think, oh, an asteroid killed the dinosaurs, so I guess they were all vacationing all together. All billions of them were vacationing off the Yucatan Peninsula when this thing hit and fried them all. No. What we mean is that the asteroid so drastically altered the climate of the entire world that the primary niche occupiers all died off. We don't know how long that took. Could have took 1 million years for some dinosaurs to die off. I doubt it. I think that would be reflected in the fossil record. But other animals, deep sea animals, burrowing mammals, reptiles like crocodiles and alligators, who have such a non-existent metabolism that they don't need to eat that much, that often. Animals like that, on the fringes of the success stories of the day, were able to survive. The dinosaurs were not, so they gradually went extinct. It's not that the asteroid hit them all and killed them. It's that the asteroid changed the Earth, and that was the world they had adapted to. So they eventually all died off. And that theory is widely accepted, to put it mildly. That is settled science. And apparently, in this book, the author is going to claim a different theory, which I don't scorn at all. Bring it on, I say. But you're going to have to work extra hard. The geological and fossil record pretty neatly support the idea of an asteroid impact and the resultant climate change. They pretty neatly support that. So I'll be fascinated to see. I'm not sneering at it at all. It's just the author has a huge amount of work to do. And I would think that if the author had an idea that would support a huge amount of work, I would have heard about it 2 years ago in a scientific journal, not in a book published for a popular audience that isn't subject to peer review. I would think that's how I would have heard about it, but we'll see. You never know. Then we have another Princeton guide. I think this might be a reissue, so this might also not count to my 40 before I'm 40. This is the Princeton Field Guide to Predatory Dinosaurs. Once upon a time, a long time ago, like 20, 25 years ago, I had a great book, not from Princeton, I think it was from Harvard, on predatory dinosaurs. It was great. I wish I still had it. A couple of dinosaur books that I've had over the decades, I really wish I still had. No idea what became of them. This thing is just about the dinosaurs that existed to carnivorous ones. So here you'll get the most famous predatory dinosaur of all, Tyrannosaurus rex, and the relatives Tyrannosaurids. But you'll get lots of other things too. There are lots of other predatory dinosaurs and all kinds of things that lived in swamps or looked like crocodiles. Fascinating. Can't wait. Then also fascinating, this is by Kit Kowal. Some of you who are in the UK might already read this. I don't know if this is out in the UK or not. This is called Blue Jerusalem. The subtitle is British Conservatism, Winston Churchill, and the Second World War. How's that for a cover? And from what I gathered, this is about the plans that the Churchill government had for England after a victory in World War II. So this would be a study of conservatism, writ broad, from the late 1930s until I guess the late 1940s. There'll be gaps there, but I don't think this is a history of World War II. I think this is something that on the surface sounds a lot more interesting than that. Can't wait to try it. I can't wait too long to try it. I've only got 12 years. This is a lot of books. But then we have, I've shown you this already. This is Tsuyoshi Hasegawa. This is his book, The Last Tsar, about Nicholas II and the fall of the House of Romanov. Well-trod subject, but I'll always take a new book on it if somebody can bring new perspectives. They don't need to do new research. I don't know that there's any new research to be done. I'm pretty sure that during thaws in the United States and Russian relations, I'm pretty sure that scholars have had access to all the pertinent materials in any Russian archive. Those archives are a lot harder to use or access now. But in the past, they haven't been. So I don't think that this author has anything new to tell me about Tsar Nicholas II or the end of the Romanovs, but I'm always interested in seeing it. Then we have, this is by James Bradley. This is an American presidential biography, one of a few on this list. This is a biography of Martin Van Buren. The subtitle of the book, which again might not be the author's idea at all, is America's First Politician. Which, if true, leapfrogs over a whole bunch of people from Massachusetts. But maybe the author if the author did write it, maybe the author has something else in mind. Martin Van Buren is not interesting. No one with the name of Van is interesting, but in American history. But I'm not going to miss a presidential biography. Van Buren hasn't had one in quite some time. Then we have something. I read something like this earlier this year. And now there's something like this coming out again. This is by Edward Champlin, and it is Tiberius and His Age: Myth, Sex, Luxury, and Power. And aside from the artistic adaptation, this has the exact same cover as Iron Imperator. Same cameo with a deified Tiberius. So I don't know what this is going to be. I wasn't all that happy with the earlier book on the subject this year was called Iron Imperator, and I wasn't all that happy with it. I've grown less happy with it the more I've thought about it. Because it's all about 21st century politics, and it shouldn't be. And I don't know what to make of this. I know nothing about the approach that this author will take. I confess I'm viewing it as a little bit of a consolation prize because the next Loeb Classical Library edition coming out next year is Valelius Paterculus, who was a general who knew Tiberius personally and wrote a history. His history of Tiberius and his time has been supremely underestimated for 2,000 years. And Loeb is coming out with a new translation, new notes, new introduction, new everything for their Loeb Classical Library edition. And really, a lot of what you would write about Tiberius is going to start and stop with that book. So why not just wait for that book? But I'll see. I've read some books on Tiberius. Tiberius is incredibly misunderstood as a Roman emperor. I've read some books that were good on him. This could be good. Just because the last one wasn't, you never know. Then this next one, there's no way this next one's going to be any good. But it's ancient history to a lot of you. It's ancient history. It's long before you were born. You won't even believe that once upon a time, tempers were hot about this figure. This book is by Steve Calabresi and Gary Lawson, with an introduction by Mark Levin, which is a real bad sign. And this is called, believe it or not, The Mies Revolution: The Making of a Constitutional Moment. And look at that heroic picture. That's Ed Meese on the cover. The pig, Ed Meese. Impeach Ed Meese. This is Ed Meese. He was an American. Oh my God. He was an American politician. He was a joke, a stuffed shirt, Saturday hog. Just that picture of him. Oh, the Mies Revolution. There was no Mies Revolution. I don't know what I'm going to make about this. It's going to revive all sorts of memories. My fingers are going to be itching for the keys of a mechanical typewriter so I could pound out a hot and heavy editorial. I wrote a lot about Ed Meese when it was $50 a gig to write about him. I cannot believe I've lived long enough to see a book like this. We will see. We will see what I make of it. You never know. The whole point, right, is I know what I know about Ed Meese, but if this author convinces me of something, this author is not, If the author convinces me to reinterpret some aspects of the factual record, fine. It's 2024, so there's a better than average chance that the author is instead going to convince me that the stuff on video and on tape isn't real. Because that's the world we live in. We live in what, so far anyway, is the apotheosis of gaslighting, where it's not that I have an alternate historical interpretation, it's that the history didn't happen. Well, that's not going to go very far with me. It doesn't go very far with me when I see it on the nightly news, and it's not going to go very far with me in a book about Ed Meese the pig. I was there. I was paying serious attention. I was getting 5 newspapers a day. I was basically David Murphy. I grew out of it, though. But anyway, this next one is by Estelle Paranque, I think. This is Thorns, Lust, and Glory, The Betrayal of Anne Boleyn. It's one of a couple of books about Anne Boleyn that are coming out before the end of the year. And this is going to be about the indisputable fact that Anne Boleyn was charged and executed on false evidence. No doubt about that at all. None whatsoever. I knew that already. Historians that go back in time and look at this stuff can spot it easily. Eric Ives, in his great biography of Anne Boleyn, points it out just nonchalantly. That I'm going to narrate the trial for you. I'm not advocating here. I'm not raising a placard outside, Hever Castle. But no, this evidence is all false. It's obviously falsified. And Anne must have known that at the time. The men who give evidence here were somewhere else when their evidence would have had them in location B. This is even marvelously dramatized in Anne of a Thousand Days, the great old movie Anne of a Thousand Days, where they take the dramatic liberty of Cromwell is questioning one of these hapless lovers of Anne Boleyn and threatening him with torture and death, which he is eventually going to suffer. But Cromwell is questioning him, and the boy is just falling apart. And the dramatic liberty that the director takes is to have Henry himself listening behind an arras, and he comes around. When he hears enough, he comes around and says, "Oh, you're lying. Oh, when did you next meet with the Queen?" And the guy burbles out an answer. He says, "That's absolutely not true. We were at Windsor that time." So the movie has Henry contradicting the evidence. Of course, in reality, Henry knew better than anybody the evidence was false. He didn't care. I imagine that's what this book is going to be about. It's going to be about how Anne Boleyn was falsely accused and whatnot. Which will only go so far. That will only go so far. We'll see. Not everything that Anne Boleyn was charged with is false. Not everything that sent her to the block, or she didn't go to the block. She was actually beheaded al fresco. but the things that condemned her weren't all false, that we know of. I mean, unless everything was invented, then they weren't all necessarily false. We don't know what her relations with her brother were, for instance. There's plenty of, it's not, despite what her brother said, it's not just the testimony of one woman that implicates, that raises the question, well, what was their relationship? You don't have to think anything monstrous. You don't have to think incest. But there's also the comments that she made, imagining a life when the king is dead. That was treason. That was a capital crime. To even imagine it. Even in your own head, although the Tudors couldn't monitor that, but certainly anything you said in public in front of other people. But it's fine, but it's fascinating for me to think about anyway, and have somebody hash over all of the storylines anyway. I just hope it's really good. This next one is by Lucy Hughes Hallett. That name's really familiar to me. I didn't go researching these authors ahead of time, as I knew this was going to be a long video anyway. But this is The Scapegoat. This is about King Charles and the Duke of Buckingham. It was a fascinating figure, absolutely fascinating figure, usually drawn for pathos when you talk about him, but the title, The Scapegoat, raises my interest, makes me think maybe this will be a really interesting approach to the Duke of Buckingham. It's a period I know well, but I can stand to know it better. It'll be fascinating to see what this author has to say. Then we have John Feinstein. This is a sports book. Sports books, I admit, are not high on my list, but John Feinstein is. I started reading him many, many books ago, and he's so good that I don't care what he writes about. He could write about, cooking in his kitchen. I would still read it. This is The Ancient Eight. This is his new book about Ivy League football. The Ivy League teams and how old they are and their storied rivalries and all the personalities and the huge news-stopping event of their massive rivalry games, at least on the eastern seacoast, once upon a time, 100 years ago. I imagine that Theodore Roosevelt will be in this book, a whole bunch of other people will be in this book. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating for me to read, even though I'm not all that interested in sports. Then we have Anne Somerset, who's a historian and biographer I really like. This is her new book, Queen Victoria and Her Prime Ministers. I could have chosen a different cover here. If you're going to use this particular painting, use the painting, not somebody's redrawing of it. And why use the painting at all? To show Victoria who had only 2 prime ministers. Why not show a painting later in her life when she'd had 10 of them? But the relationship here is fascinating. Queen Victoria was very much becoming, the modern idea of a constitutional monarch who is essentially powerless. But it was unthinkable to think of her that way at the time, and her ministers didn't. But they knew perfectly well that actual, real state power rested in their hands, not hers. So it's a fascinating dynamic of things both spoken and unspoken. I have read many, many books on this subject, but I'm always interested in what this author has to say. So we will see. Then we get back to Dante. This is not a graphic novel. This is by Joseph Luzzi, and this is Dante's Divine Comedy, a biography, which tells the story of Dante, what we can tell of Dante composing the work, goes into a lot of the history and biography that's encompassed in the book, especially in Inferno, and then tells the story of the book's history following that, following Dante's life. Where was this printed? Who revered it? How did it become? How did it become a classic? Where did it get the name Divine Comedy? I imagine will be in here, and lots of other stuff, including probably lots of stuff about different translations. I love this sort of thing, these sorts of histories of books. I think they're just fascinating. So I'll gladly gobble it up. This next one, this subject fascinates me a lot less than it fascinates other people. But I'll give it a try. It is an American presidential biography, so Martin Van Buren doesn't particularly fascinate me. I'm going to read that book. So I'm certainly going to read this. This is Christopher Cox. He's really, really good. And this is his new book on Woodrow Wilson. The Light Withdrawn. I have no idea what that title could possibly refer to, unless it's referring to Wilson's stroke at the end of his life. So I don't know. I haven't read anything about this book. If that's what the subtitle is referring to, then this might be just a study of the end of his life and not anything else. I'll be interested in it either way. This might not be a full-dress biography, is what I'm saying. Then we have more Tudor history. Not often that a year gives us a lot of Tudor history. Certainly, this is something I want to get to before I turn 40. This is by Nathan Amin, and this is Son of Prophecy. This is just about Henry Tudor. And specifically, it seems like just about his rise to power. So, all the way to the Battle of Bosworth Field, all the way, all the uncertain years, living on the continent, not knowing if any new servant was a paid agent of the crown in England and was going to knife you or poison you or whatnot, never knowing what your chances were, always thinking your chances were slim, including a near disaster where you had planned and worked and spent a huge amount of money. Your mother had spent a huge amount of money to launch an invasion, and it gets scattered and wrecked, apparently by natural forces, where you think, oh, well, I put everything on that throw and it failed, so now I must come up with a different idea for my future. No, the idea to try again. It's a fascinating story. It tends to be glossed over in Tudor histories because the Tudors themselves are more fascinating. But Henry, he waited in the wilderness. He had strong personalities around him, including his weird, inhuman mother. And he took the crown by force. He wasn't just a normal usurper showing up in the council room with a couple of guards. He took the crown on the battlefield and killed the previous king. It's the last time that anyone in English history has ever done that. And it's a fascinating story. I would imagine this book will culminate in that story. I don't know. Then we have Gene Strauss, always really good. This is family romance. This is John Singer Sargent, the greatest painter of all time, and the Wertheimers. So we'll see what kind of story this author is going to draw from that. I mean, they were patrons. They were good to him. They liked him. He was often their guest. But is this going to be, I would hope that this will be a story about their lives and their fortune. Sargent has plenty of stuff written about him. And I've often said there should be a book about everyone who sat for him. A whole book. And that might be what this book is. We will see. And then we can finish up with yet another bit of Tudor history. And we'll finish up with this 40 under 40 with Henry VIII and the Plantagenet Poles by Adam Pennington. And this is about, there you have Reginald Pole up there lurking over Henry's shoulder, as he did for so many years of Henry's life. This is the Poles were, as the cover says, a Plantagenet family. The ones who lost at Bosworth Field, but only one of them lost. The family tended to think that England was theirs. It had been theirs for 1,000 years. They thought, what are these Tudor people? What are these Tudor people? We're the one. This is our show. They might have won just temporarily, but we are the rightful rulers of this country. And so Henry had a very fraught relationship with them. Believe it or not, despite that being pretty openly their attitude, Henry was pretty forbearing with them, with most of them, for a long time. It was only when a couple of them, the two most notorious examples are on the cover here, it was only when a couple of them pushed him beyond the limits that even Henry was not a normal man. He was short-tempered, and as he got older, he got a lot more bloody-minded. But even a normal person would have thought, this is way too far. Who do you think you are? Unfortunately, that's not a question you want to ask a Plantagenet, especially if you're a Tudor. Who do you think you are is going to get you an answer you don't like. But I wonder if this book will deal with some of the less famous figures. These two figures are very famous. And the female there, the woman there, died a horrible death for being a Plantagenet, but also for being a traitor, for being an intriguer against the crown. Anyone would have gone to the block for that same offense. But I wonder if this book, how much detail this book will get into. Will it be just the Marquis Poles, or will it be other people? It was a big family, and there were lots of other interesting stories in there. I will see. I think I've read Adam Pennington before, and I think I've enjoyed him. But anyway, that is 40 under 40. Those are 40 books that I need to read before 12 years is over. So since the average American reads one book a year, I'm going to have to work extra hard to get these done. But I thought since the James Reads Books has already made a list, I thought I would make a list as well of books I need to read before I reach 40. So I'll get cracking. But I will wrap this up for now. I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.